Today, we're going to dive into 4 incredible and pretty different stories from history. Now, on the surface, they might seem completely disconnected, but they're all woven together by this one powerful, fundamental thread: the absolute, unrelenting human will to survive.
And that's really the question at the heart of this, isn't it? Each of these stories, it's a different kind of battlefield for survival. One is against the environment, another is against the raw elements, one's against scheming political enemies, and the last is a fight for the very soul of an idea. So, let's get into it.
So we're going to look at 4 very distinct portraits of resilience. We'll start with a civilization that literally mastered a desert. Then, we'll see how people fought off the cold with nothing but dirt and their own wits. After that, a queen who gambled everything she had for power. And finally, a colony that risked it all for a principle.
Okay, our first story takes us to a place that, honestly, most of the world just forgot about for nearly 5,000 years. We're going to the ancient city of Caral in Peru. And what's amazing about this civilization is that it didn't rise through war or conquest, but through sheer intelligence and community.
To really get Caral, you have to let this timeline sink in. We are talking about a complex, fully planned city that was thriving almost 5,000 years ago. Think about that. That's before the Great Pyramids of Egypt, before Stonehenge, before the famous cities of Mesopotamia. It completely rewrites what we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization in the Americas.
And here is where Caral just stands out completely. You know, when we think of ancient empires, our minds usually go to war, to conquest. But archaeologists digging in Caral found something absolutely astounding. No weapons, no defensive walls, 0 signs of conflict. Their pyramids weren't tombs for pharaohs. They were public centers for festivals and community gatherings. This whole society was built on a foundation of peace and trade. It's a powerful reminder that cooperation, not just conquest, can build a society that lasts.
So how in the world did they do it? Through just incredible ingenuity. They took a barren desert and turned it into farmland with sophisticated irrigation. They built these enormous pyramids to be earthquake-proof, using these woven reed bags they called shikras to haul stones. They even aligned their entire city with the stars. This wasn't about brute force. This was a civilization that survived by literally outthinking its environment.
Now, our next portrait gives us a totally different picture of survival. We're shifting from the grand scale of an entire civilization to the intimate, daily battle of a single family. We're talking about medieval peasants and their war against winter, a fight at its most raw and visceral.
So forget stone and mortar. Peasant homes were often made of something called wattle and daub, and that's basically a woven lattice of wooden strips smeared with a lovely mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. Yeah, it sounds pretty grim, I know, but that dung was a critical and very available insulator. It was the first line of defense in a house that was probably more like a drafty shed with a roof.
But maybe their most vital survival tactic is also the most surprising one. When the weather got truly dangerously cold, peasants brought their animals, their cows, their goats, their pigs inside with them at night. I mean, the body heat from just one cow could be the difference between freezing to death and waking up in the morning. Imagine it. Noisy, smelly, chaotic. But in the battle against winter, a warm, slobbery cow was your best friend. Letting the fire go out overnight? That could be a death sentence. So this led to a nightly ritual called banking the fire. They let the fire burn down to embers and then carefully bury those glowing embers in ash. This created this kind of slow-burning, insulated core that would keep them alive until sunrise. It was an ingenious, low-tech solution to a life or death problem. A little piece of art passed down through generations, where a single surviving ember meant victory.
From that primal struggle for warmth, we now step into a very different kind of cold, the calculated, cutthroat world of the Tudor court. This is the story of Anne Boleyn, a woman whose survival didn't depend on outsmarting nature, but on outmaneuvering the most powerful people in England.
Anne's story is just a masterclass in ambition. She was educated in Europe, and she came back to England with this fire and sophistication that completely captivated King Henry VIII. She flat out refused to be his mistress. She gambled that he would literally break with the Catholic Church just to make her his queen, and she won. But her victory was fragile. Her failure to give him a son turned her allies into her worst enemies, and her spectacular rise was matched only by her incredibly swift and brutal fall.
And if you want to understand why her position was so dangerous, all you have to do is look at the woman who replaced her. Anne was fire. She was intelligent, defiant, always challenging a king who expected total obedience. Jane Seymour, on the other hand, was her complete opposite.
gentle, compliant, soothing. So when Henry got tired of being challenged by Anne, Jane's quiet nature started to look like a pretty safe harbor. The very personality traits that won Anne the crown were the same ones that ultimately led to her death.
Even in her final moments, on the scaffold, facing a French swordsman brought over specifically for her execution, Anne didn't break. She refused to confess to the bogus treason charges. Instead, she kept her composure, she forgave her accusers, and she spoke about her own soul. It was one final powerful act of control in a life that was just one big, dangerous game of power.
All right, our final portrait is about a totally different kind of survival. This isn't for warmth or for power, but for an idea. We're heading to Boston in 1773, where a protest over something as simple as tea became a fight for the very soul of a new nation.
To really understand the Boston Tea Party, you have to get this one thing straight. It was not about the price of tea. In fact, the Tea Act of 1773 actually made tea cheaper for the colonists. But there was a catch. There was still a tax. And for the colonists, buying that cheaper tea meant they were accepting the idea of taxation without representation. It was a trap, and they knew it. So rejecting the tea, well, that was an act of ideological survival.
The scale of what they did that night was just staggering. On a cold December night, a group of colonists, disguised, boarded 3 ships and then methodically destroyed 342 chests of tea. This wasn't some chaotic riot. It was a planned, disciplined act of political protest. They were sending a crystal-clear message across the Atlantic. We will not be bought. Britain's response was swift, and it was furious. They passed a series of laws that the colonists started calling the Intolerable Acts. They shut down Boston's harbor, completely dissolved its government, and flooded the city with troops. The plan was to make a brutal example out of Boston, to crush the rebellion before it had a chance to spread. But it backfired, spectacularly. Instead of isolating Boston, Britain's punishment actually united the colonies. They saw what was happening to Boston and they realized, hey, that could be us next. Food and supplies started pouring in from other colonies, and in 1774, they all got together and formed the First Continental Congress. Britain hadn't extinguished a spark. They had fanned it into the flames of revolution.
So what have we seen? 4 completely different battles for survival. We saw Corral's brilliant engineering against a harsh desert, the medieval peasants' gritty, raw endurance against the freezing cold, Anne Boleyn's high-stakes political gamble for power and influence, and the American colonists' defiant stand for a core principle.
Each story really shows us that resilience isn't just one thing, right? It's creativity, it's grit, it's ambition, and it's conviction. And it leaves us with a pretty big question for our own time. As we face our own challenges, from a changing environment to political divides, what portrait of resilience are we going to create? What's our story of survival going to be?